So the most amazing things happen with little planning. So
yeah.
We are now live on Facebook, it looks like.
Oh, wow.
Thanks, Brianna. Does not feel like Monday.
no,
it doesn't.
Right?
This week.
Everything has been blending since February.
Right. Yeah.
So true.
Right.
What is 2020 anymore, literally?
Uh,
But I'm glad everyone's here. Let's get started. Okay. Well, first and foremost, hello everyone. Welcome and thank y'all for joining us this evening. My name is Najma and I am part of Black Women Speak, and our work is centered in gathering Black women in Minnesota and virtually around the country, and virtually around the country to cultivate a community and share our experiences as a way to heal, find joy, and move towards liberation on our own terms. Before we get into our conversation this evening, I would like to thank our panelists for holding this space with us in talking about sexual violence, its different avenues, and shame culture. We know these are personal conversations, but very much needed and long overdue, especially in our own communities and our global community as a whole. Before I let everyone introduce themselves, I'd like to introduce Hana Dinku, our moderator.
yeah, thanks, Najma. Thank you for putting this together for us so we could be here to meet each other and to speak with each other. So thank you for all your work. Yeah, so as Najma said, my name is Hana Dinku. I am the director for the Pan-Afrikan Center at Augsburg. I use pronouns she, her, hers. And as I'm originally from Ethiopia. I was born in Ethiopia. I grew up in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis. So I've been in the US since I was 8 years old. But this is a topic I think that's very real in my culture as an Ethiopian, as somebody that grew up in the US, as a Black woman. I think this is a very relevant topic for us to discuss. And working at Augsburg, we have a huge Somali population, and I've seen the Somali Me Too movement and how that's impacted my students and the community that I work closely with. And so I'm really, really glad that we're having this conversation. I will let all panelists introduce themselves. Maybe if you could say your name, a little bit about the work that you do, and why you've chosen to join us tonight.
Hello, everyone. My name is Osman. I am the founder of Brave Foundation, Inc. Brave is a nonprofit. It stands for Brilliant, Resilient, Ambitious, Vibrant Elite, and it targets the Somali girls and women to provide resources, awareness, and overall empowerment. We concentrate a lot on women's health initiative, as well as cultural engagement, self-identity, identifying self-identity as well. So we work around empowering the girls. We have come together, as they mentioned, for the sexual violence that's currently affecting our community. And as they mentioned as well, it's globally affecting everybody. But finally, most of us East Africans are now facing it head on first. And we have a lot of the survivors are coming forward and speaking. So we're working really hard to collaborate with other women-led organizations to provide safe space. And that's our first priority right now that we're working on. Nice to meet you guys, and thanks for having me on.
I can go next.
Yeah.
My name is Maryan Abdinur. I use the pronouns she, her. I am a farmer and a community organizer in South Minneapolis. My work is around the narratives around food sovereignty and creating alternative food systems in communities of color that looks at where do we fit in the food story and how does the food story work for us, and then thinking through that, It's around a lot about creating our own narratives of what food sovereignty means for us as predominantly a refugee community and an immigrant community. And then just the tangled history of this country and what it means to be Black in the diaspora and in the US, and the multiple narratives and the intersections of our identities that come through that. What brings me here today is just to offer up to listen, to hear, to stand as a witness for our community. And, you know, what does healing look like? I strongly believe when a hurt has been done in a community, unless that hurt is addressed, anything that comes after it, it's really not going to be very fruitful for our community and how we move forward.
Hi all, my name is Alla Hassan. I am an advocate with SOS, Sexual Violence Services in Ramsey County. I came from Rochester about 2 years ago, and I'm with the Sudani community. That's how I identify. And the work that I do currently, as a sexual assault advocate, anytime there's a sexual assault in Ramsey County and someone discloses, we accompany them to the hospital to get their rape kit exam done, to file a police report, follow through with them during their courts, or if they need a protective order or anything along those lines. Additionally, my specific programming is in prevention of sexual violence. And so how do we do that as a community? How do we respond accordingly? And how do we also amplify the prevention efforts that are needed in place so that we no longer have to live in a world where there is sexual violence. And I'm just so grateful to be in this space amongst other brilliant, amazing women. And my presence here is solely due to the fact that as Africans, we are all interconnected. And when this movement was amplified in the Somali community, it also moved over to the Sudani community and so forth. And so I'm just so appreciative of the conversations, and I'm so appreciative of the space that we're holding here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all being here and for being willing to talk about what's a lot of times triggering, right? This can be a really triggering conversation for us, for women, for Black women, for African women, because I think this is such just a reality in our communities, in many ways, an accepted reality. And so before we get into some of the questions that I want to hear some of your views on, Lul, would you be able to give us a little background in how the whole Somali Me Too movement started, or what you know about how all that came about on social media? Oh, did we lose you? Lul, did we lose you for a second? I don't know if you heard what I was asking.
No, I apologize. I didn't know.
Oh, no worries.
It just dropped and came back on.
Yeah, I thought so. No worries. I was asking if you felt comfortable giving us a little context and some background on how the Somali Me Too movement kind of started on social media, if you're aware of that.
Yes. So it started with a young woman who shared her story. I believe it was on Twitter. And as soon as she came out with her story, everyone just started engaging. A lot of women came about sharing their story and coming forward. You know, there's always good and bad that comes out of sensitive subjects like this. So, but overall, I felt like there was more support of people standing up and trying to find solutions, trying to find creating spaces for these young women. The community coming together to finally, you know, stop the ape culture. The ape culture meaning shame, if we were to translate into English, and redefining. So I know that our organization, right along with 7 or 6 other women-led organizations, are coming together to redefine what the ape culture is. But yes, it started with one woman, young woman sharing her story on Twitter and then spreading across for, you know, it kind of empowered other women to finally feel free to share their story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been incredible seeing, even just before this, I'd just done Somali Me Too, East African Me Too, and just looked at it and looked at all these different stories of a lot of times women and sometimes men also sharing, you know, having been sexually abused or harassed, or any form of violence, personal violence. So Lil, you just kind of mentioned this culture, the shame culture, right? And I wanted us to be able to spend some time today to talk about what that means, and to talk about what rape culture is. I think one of the things that scares me is that when I was looking through social media, and like you said, Lil, I think there's a lot of incredible support that we're seeing of women supporting each other. But some of the scariest part is, the folks on there who are going off on these folks who are sharing their stories. And a lot of time it's actually women, right, that are doing that, that are telling them, you're a whore. Why are you just saying something now? This happened a few years, however many years ago. You say you said you were a little girl when this happened. Why didn't you say something like that? It makes my skin crawl seeing this really violent response from women, as well as men. And I know folks who have came forward and shared their stories have been threatened with violence. Many of them have. And so I want to spend a little time talking about what shame culture looks like and what rape culture looks like in our communities, right? And if you could all kind of speak to that from your experience. Alla, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as a Sudani person, there are some specific things in our culture that are different from Ethiopian or Somali or other African cultures. But one thing that is present in all of our communities is that shame culture. And it starts at the home when anything that's considered outside of the norms, anything that is considered that's not righteous or modest, it's considered shameful. Even if you are raising your voice, even if you are seen alone with a boy, even if you are seen without your hijab proper. And each household, I think, defines shame a different way. But essentially, as a community, the focus is on women. So there's this idea that a woman should be seen and not heard, and a woman has these specific aspects about her that should be the way they are. And if anything is out of line, it's shameful, it's abhorrent, it's a disgrace, and she's ostracized. And so the how we relate that to sexual violence is that whenever there is an outcry that a sexual assault happens and there is disclosure, it's considered also shameful. And I think it's because people don't want to acknowledge that there is a problem, because once they acknowledge it, they have to then provide the solution. And so it's easier to consider something as shameful so that there is no solution to it, because shame a lot of times is weighed with guilt, and you feel you are burdened. You are burdening the whole community. And so that's what they want to do. By shaming you and ostracizing you, that's how they're silencing you. And that's how they refuse to listen and refuse to support and believe and do what they're supposed to do. So in the culture that I'm from, unfortunately, that shame culture is that silencing. Silencing the woman if she wants to disclose, or the men. And because we are not equipped with the resources to support, and we don't want to do that work. So it's easier for us to, again, silence the woman and not even want to hear what's happening and remain in this way that things have been, just because they have been that way. And I'm just excited that things are being shaken up and voices are being heard and they are being listened to. And it's by women who are oftentimes silenced in these communities. Now their voices are being amplified. And so long as there is that support, so long as there are more voices, that's how we can dismantle those systems that are in place and those cultures that are in place that are set to silence women.
That is so powerful. That is so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I think what you said about the guilt really, I think, hits it on the head, right? What's kind of at the core of shame. And even just what I was mentioning, the videos that I was watching of people responding and being really angry and violent towards these women who are coming up with their stories or coming forward with their stories. I can't help but listen to them and even their arguments and be like, you know what happens in your community, you know what these people did, and you're really trying to like push this guilt off yourself and try to accuse somebody else. But you know what I feel like? I don't know if I'm imagining it, but I can feel it from this one video that I saw from this one young woman who was just going off about her cousin being accused. And so I think that's such an interesting perspective that you bring. Maryan, how do you see this play out in your community?
For me, I think I so agree with what Alla is saying, you know, that it comes from the way that you get a victim to, or a survivor to shut down, is that guilt. And what does guilt do to you? Like, right, it starts to eat you from the inside, and you carry this weight around, and you tend to push, like you'll end up pushing yourself to the back, and you become a wallflower. And then there is really, the longer you sit with it, the harder or the monumental it feels to speak against it, right? Like time change, and then the later you speak about it, the more you will get that, why didn't you say it when it happened, right? And at some point you do say it, but I think for me, the way I see it, and how there's three silent narratives that I see in it. There's the one of like, whether, so say a parent sees it, or somebody that's an elder sees it or hears about it, and they're silencing, and that guilting of like comes from sometimes for the girls, like if we highlight this issue, right? It's one of like, who's going to marry you if somebody knows about this, right? Or it might be that, well, you know, this has happened to you, you might as well marry whoever the person who has done the harm to you is, to kind of eliminate that shame from the public to your family and to like just your community. And it keeps going in this like ripple that can evaluate, because that's what the person that's shutting you down is seeing. Or perhaps it has happened to them and they've never told their story, and they're projecting their own fear on you, and that stops them from hearing you or listening to you. The other is one, maybe they're protecting the other person, the harm doer, of like, what happens to them if this is public? You know, how will he get married? How will he do this, right? And that's another effect that is projected onto the victim, to the survivors. And then the other silent part that I see is there isn't a container. There isn't a container in our culture, as it has been filtered through Western culture of colonialism, right? Like having to replace it, constantly trying to assimilate to another culture. We have lost our own structures and our own cultural practices of how to take care of it, right? I've lived in Somalia. I came to this country when I was 13 years old. And I remember in our small town, in our village, when issues like this came, there was a different process. There's a much different process than it is right now. And I know, as much as I've like, the more I've moved into urban settings and the more I've moved into the West, I don't see that practice of accountability and then dealing with the harm doer and a process of healing. What today we call healing justice work, right? Of how do we heal as a collective community, both giving space for a survivor to tell their story, to heal, to be, you know, kind of like, you can never undo that loss. You can never give them back any of that, but there is a level of creating security for them and listening to them that we no longer have the capacity or the ability to do. We have the capacity. And because of that narrative, I think we've also gotten to this place of like, if it comes out, what do I do with it? I have no idea what to do with it. I have no idea where to take it. So I might as well just shut you here and it stays in this small place. And then I will do everything that I can to forget about it. But then anything that happens, any change that influences one person in our community, influence all of us, right? If you shut that voice down, there is a younger girl that's watching. There's a brother that, like, there's somebody else that's watching. There is somebody who gets affirmed in their harmful behavior, and there's somebody who gets shut up in the hurt that they're going through, right? And it just continues to ripple, and that harm continues until we do something about it and go back to that root. And I think that's why it's so important. And I'm so grateful and feel for the individuals that have come forward and have shared their stories. But I also want to make space, and, you know, what does protecting them look like as a community? What is our institutions, from our masjids to our homes? What are we going to do to actively engage and protect our community members so this is not happening? This is not affirming more harm. This is not shutting somebody else's voice, because that's not the world I want my 7-year-old to grow in. Right? I want a space for him to be a full human being and to understand what it means to have consent, what it means to be respectful, and what it means to collectively be in community. And I can't do that alone. He needs to have a community and a foundation to be able to do that. And so I think that's what it does. Like, the idea of shame it's not, it doesn't just stay within one family. It doesn't just stay with one person. It ripples across our communities, and we take it everywhere we go. And I think there's a moment to pause and understand that we have a place, we have a way of dealing with it as a collective community, whichever, you know, culture that we're coming from, there's a way of dealing with it, but we need to pause first. I think that's what I'm not seeing. There's like you run with it, you immediately respond. But what does it mean to pause, to hold that pain, to feel it and to move through it? That's the only way through pain, right? Like, and this is happening so publicly. This is happening on social media. It's available to anybody across the world who has, you know, a computer access to them. And you can like follow it simply by, you know, Me Too Somali movement, or, you know, East Africa, and you can type in today, it's everywhere. And what does that mean? And how does that re-traumatize everybody? How does it re-traumatize the individuals that are telling their stories every day, right? Because it's still trending and it's still going. And so that's what I see. You know, it's not necessarily just how I see it in community, it's how I'm seeing it in Minneapolis right now. This is happening within the Somali community, within our music scene. This is also happening in there. There's a lot of individuals that are coming forward with their stories. So it's kind of a ripple. For me, I see it kind of a ripple across Minneapolis right now in the midst of, you know, a global pandemic and an uprising. And so it's a lot to hold, but it's something that we need to move through, and each of us individual needs to do our work in thinking about when we hear this, what happens in our bodies, and then do our work behind that too, because you're simultaneously doing so many of it, but it's something that we must do in order to move.
Yeah, absolutely. That is, there's so much in that, right? You brought up a few points for me as you're speaking. One is this idea that you're mentioning about what our culture and what our life looks like in the context of where we are right now, right? Like where we are in the US, in the diaspora, and what the culture looks like back home. And that's not to say that we all know, you know, in our respective countries, the violence against women is rampant. It's become normalized in a lot of spaces. Yet, you know, you mentioned that there's a different way of community holding each other accountable and healing. And so, Lul, this kind of reminded me of what you mentioned about the work that you do with Brave, and this idea of having allowing Somali folks here to be able to hold both part of their identities as Somalis and as Americans, especially for those that have been born here or like me, came here when they were really young, right? This identity. And so I think one of the things that I see on social media with this Me Too movement is people accusing the folks that are coming forward with their stories of, like, you know, not being traditional enough, not being Somali enough, Ethiopian enough, or whatever it is, and buying into this white feminism idea, you know, this idea of like, you're not respecting the culture. And so it's interesting to me then, you know, I'm really glad there are organizations and folks like you, Lul, that are doing this work of being like, no, you can have both identities. You don't have to pick one or the other. And holding into that or understanding that or exploring that doesn't make you less African, less, you know, Somali for doing so. So anyways, I was hoping you could speak to that a little bit and talk about how you see shame culture in your community.
Yes, thanks, Hannah. Yes, so we do try to tell them that to self-identify, you can merge the two cultures, you know, because a lot of, besides being Black and besides being Muslims, a lot of the obstacles that humans face, it's aligned. So as long as you're being true to who you are, you're being true to your character, and you're, you know, standing by your morals, you can pick and choose what works for you as an individual, as long as, you know, you're just as a human being with a good character. As far as the shame ebb culture, you know, we're all need to work together to change the narrative on that. And instead of practicing ebb, you know, that it's ebb to speak about your sexual abuse, we want to create safe space for survivors to freely and openly speak and share their stories that best fits them, because not everybody is in the same path and not everybody is in the same place where they're all ready to talk about it. So we need to be very mindful and be very sensitive for the people that, you know, may trust me with their story, but that doesn't mean that we need to force them to publicly speak about it, because they may not be ready. So at all given, we just need to treat each individual, as they come and as they are ready to speak about it. And by redefining, I just want us to start talking in this narrative moving forward from now on, that it is not apt to share your story. It is not apt to seek therapy. It is not apt to listen with an open mind. It is not apt, and it is apt to silence. It is apt to blame the victim. It is to question what the individual is wearing, because as you mentioned, Hannah, you'll see online them calling them whores. It is apt to even ask them, where were you when this happened to you? It is apt to blame the victim once again. It is it's apt to force someone to stay silent, especially if they're ready to speak about it. Another thing that Maryan and Alla hit it to the nail when they were talking about as a community, and what are some things that women are identified like as Alla, when you said, you're to be seen, not to be heard. Yes, you hear that all across the board. So another thing is, they think about the family name before they think about the person that's in pain. So it is apt to put your family name before someone who's in pain. It is apt to disregard someone who is in pain. So just moving forward, we don't necessarily, by canceling and redefining it, we want to switch it around. Whatever you're saying that's apt today, it's not apt. Whatever you're trying to go against and silence the person is apt, because we can't go from generation to generation of trauma. And it's good to understand, because as of our culture, when we talk about our community, we're not singling out our community. We also have to come from a place that this is something that happens in every single community. This is not we're not excused from it. So the fact that it's happening in our community, we have to also face head on, and we have to change the narrative. We have to change the way things have been happening, because it hasn't been working. And I'm so grateful, as all of you guys are and everyone else, that these young women have, that they have the brave, but even them being brave, we have to think about the level of pain and how we felt them as a society to, that they had to go to Twitter to put their story. That's pain. They had to be in a real deep pain and feel like there was nowhere to go for them to reach out to Twitter and put their story. So as a community, as a society, that should have woken us up alone. And we're not there when things are happening. We're not in no predicament to judge. We're not in no predicament to question. So for the shame culture, we just have to, from every conversation we have going forward, we have to make sure that we're rephrasing it. Like as soon as we heard that word, no, you have it wrong. That's not what ab means. That's not what shame means. Is shame actually what you're saying? That's ab. And by redefining and redirecting, hopefully we'll change the narrative. We don't want our generation, the next generation to go through this. It's been happening before our great-grandparents. And if we keep doing the same thing and then expect change, it's not going to happen. So Alla, Maryan, everything you guys said, you guys nailed it. Maryan, we're from the same community. Alla, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Our communities are very aligned, so there's not much of difference. We have the same faith. So everything you guys said, what heads on.
And just to add, sorry, I think just to add on what you said, we have to do a lot of unlearning, and in conjunction to culturally, a lot of the harmful ideologies we've internalized. Spiritually, we've also internalized harmful things like the idea of purity. And if sexual violence is committed against one, it's the idea that you're not pure anymore. You're not pure first in the eyes of God, and you're not pure secondly in your community. So I just wanted to add that to it in conjunction to what y'all said.
Yeah, I feel that, Najma. And I also think like, I'm an organizer, so I'm always just like, okay, here's what the grievances is, and then what are the systems that are in place that support that grievances to continually exist, right? Mm-hmm. And I blame that narrative on our, as a Somali community, the need to adapt the Arab culture in order to be a proper Muslim, right? Which it's bull, I think, we're life. But like, right, what does it mean? Where is our culture in this? And what is our culture, right? And then the idea of like, this is not coming forward and telling your story when you're the only option you're left with, and no one is willing to listen to you, and all these institutions that exist that are supposed to, you know, be protecting you and looking out for your rights, or before it even gets to you, to teach this, right? To teach our community what it really means. What is sexual violence? Why does it exist? And what are the steps to dealing with it? It's that culture is not stagnant. It's not one thing. It's not written in stone. Culture is influenced by the times. It's influenced by the movement and behavior. It's influenced by political powers and the analysis of you know, class, race, and gender. What does it look? That's what, then you adapt your culture. That's the beauty of culture, is that it moves and it changes. And so if it's not serving us, and it's not protecting us from our most vulnerable, you know, like starting that, if it does not serve our most vulnerable population, then it's not culture anymore. It's another buy-in to an oppressive system that does not work for us. So it, you know, why adhere to it? Because it's not protecting you, it's not serving you, it is not creating space for you to be fully who you are. And in any space that you can't fully be who you are, that's an oppressive space. And that, so for that reason, culture is not a good reason. Yeah. And it's ridiculous to me when people say it's not, like, yeah, it's not who we are, nor is the harm behavior. That's not who we are either. That's not how we're programmed, but we create space for that harm to exist before we create space to hold pain and to listen and to hold accountable to those who have caused the harm, and then create a healing space for that, the harmed individuals, of course, first and foremost, and then those that are harming as well, because, you know, they are a part of our community, and that itself is our responsibility as a community collectively to work to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I love that you said that. I think this idea, I find that a lot of our communities, and I'll say specifically immigrant communities, have this fear that if they let one thing go, that we're going to lose our culture, like we're losing our identity out here because our youth are getting, you know, connected and pulled in different ways. And there's this we're just terrified that we're going to lose our identity, which I think is actually a normal response to the immigrant experience, right? A lot of the ways that we would reinforce culture is gone. And so, yeah, so you do have people holding on to the really terrible things about our culture too, and our tradition. The gender role that we think is how things are supposed to be, or this culture of violence and abuse, holding on to that, of being like, you know, respect of whether it's elders or whoever it is, at the cost of the victim, right, of the survivors. And some, I think, Maryan, you had said earlier about what we're asking women and children to hold, right? Because we don't want, and I think Lul, you might have been the one who said this too, the guilt and not wanting to address things, right? It just makes it easier for everybody involved if the person that has been violated, the person that's been assaulted, just holds it themselves. Like, if you can just do that. We're asking these, you know, sometimes, you know, 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds, or it doesn't even matter the age at this point, right? Like, we're asking these one individuals to hold on to all the trauma and all the pain, generational trauma, just so the rest of us can kind of keep moving and keeping up, maintaining some status that we think is what's right in our culture, right? And like we all are saying, what we're seeing is that these women are speaking up and saying, no, I'm not gonna let this hold me anymore. I'm not gonna hold this trauma by myself anymore, right? And it makes me think about our generation, this generation right now. We have an opportunity to have this kind of culture and tradition end with us. It's a lot, I think, for us to hold. It's a lot to do. But I know I have nieces. I have my students, and the idea of this continuing on or not doing something terrifies me. So yeah, I'm really glad that we have phenomenal women like yourself that are leading this work and that are finding ways to speak up. And so one of the things that I'm curious about when we talk about shame culture are who are the ones who are the keepers of our culture? Like who are the ones at the core of our culture? Who determines who are the who are the holders of this? Who gets to say what is and what isn't? Does that make sense what I'm asking? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Cis hetero man.
Yeah, let me say more.
Yeah. I mean, that's who usually is in any society, the power structure lies there. But yeah, that's the first thing that comes. I think they're maybe the ones that are where the fear is placed, like that's who people are afraid of, that's who can make, because it's who's running the masjids, it's who's running the duksis where the kids are going to learn the Quran and so forth. But then I think the people who hold it and make it like kind of exist within it or contain it is our hoyos, it's our mothers, right? It's the women, and a lot of that has to do with that fear for that child, right? Like that what I was mentioning earlier, like if this is known, I don't know what to do, so I'm your first layer of protection, so I'm going to do what I can, and that the best way I know how to right now is to quiet you down, right? Yeah. But that's not 100% true too, right? Like there's structures to it, and I guess my point of it is it's complex. We hold a lot of complexities, there's a lot, and I think that's the other point that we miss. There is also in the midst of this, like it's so harmful, yet there is a place of like needing to protect you, of love that it's coming from. It's misguided, but yes, it's coming from there. And then I think above it all is like, how do we shine a light on it to show that I know you're scared for me, I know that you're worried about my safety, but telling my story and me getting healing is much more important than this momental fear that you can hold right now. Like, right, be brave with me for this as we go through this road. It's going to be hard, it's never easy, as we're seeing right now publicly being played out, but can that love be guided in a way that it can hold these complexities, it can hold this pain, and that it can sometimes there's consequences to it, right? Especially when you're going against what the buy-in to the normal culture is, although none of us have agreed to this culture in a lot of ways. Right? Like nobody has asked me to say, Maryan, can you sign here? This is what our Somali culture is. Great, this is what we're doing in Minnesota. Like, like I haven't signed on to it. However, I'm still held to it. That's like what I'm told about. Like when I'm at work, when I am, from as simple as like, it feels simple, but as I'm on the farm, I farm right in Minneapolis. And as I'm there, as people come talk to me, Somali women, men walk by, and most of the time people are concerned of me getting darker being outside, which I'm just like, I'm growing my own food. Can we talk about that? Mm-hmm. But that's it. Like there's this concern for me, but the concern is so in this colorism, right? Like how, and I think there's true care in that, but that's not the point of it. Like that's not the point why I'm there, and that's not the point of me taking power in my own and food. And it's the same way, right? Like when an individual steps up and talks about the sexual assault, the sexual violence that has been done to them, they're taking their power back and taking their narrative. And I think the least amount we can do is to support them in that, to hold that love with them, and to say, yes, like this is what you need. I mean, how powerful is it for somebody to come and tell you what they need? Mm-hmm. That's amazing. And I think it's then our responsibility to hold it, and any failure in that is our responsibility as a collective, as a community, and not that individuals.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Alla, my question for you, and this is kind of given the work that you do, what does it look like for Black women in the diaspora to support each other, right? Like, what does solidarity look like for us when we're talking about shame culture, when we're talking about rape culture, and what does it look like for us to be in solidarity with each other?
Such a great question. I think what it looks like is having no expectations. when we go into it having an expectation of how someone should respond to trauma, how they should disclose, when they should disclose, that's when we do each other a disservice. Women are by nature resilient and brilliant and powerful and strong, but they're also human beings who have a multitude of other emotions. They can be tired, they can be just overburdened and have to, just don't want to do anything, don't want any expectations on them for how they should respond, how they should feel, how they should be. And we need to accept a woman for all that she is, with all of her multi-dimensional pieces, with all of the layers that she is. That's the best way we can support each other. And I feel that we as a community have failed too often because we have had this expectation that a woman who has disclosed should be sad and weak and upset. And there's powerful women out there who are laughing and joking because that's how they respond to trauma. That's how they want to move forward. They don't want to be in this space of hurt and pain. They want to feel other emotions, and that's right. That's perfectly natural and normal. And so I feel that that support could look like just us not having any expectations of each other, whether it's how we feel, when we feel it, what we say, how we say it, and where we say it. Because again, we each have different different stories and different lives that we've lived, and we also just need to listen to each other. I feel like a lot of times we're so focused on being solution based of what can I do, how do I do it, when do I do it, when all we're asked of is to be there in support. And oftentimes that can be in silence, and that's powerful. We don't have to say more, we don't have to say much, we don't have to say anything at all. We could just be there for each other. And so the best way I feel that we can support each other is not having any expectations, and then asking each other, how can I support you? That alone would allow folks to come to us and let us know how they want to be supported, as opposed to us having any expectations or any specific answer, any specific way of response. And I think we also have to be considerate of the fact that each of us has a different culture, and each of us has, even within the Somali community, I'm sure each community has different cultures and different traditions, even within the Sudani community and so forth. And a lot of it can be tied with American culture, a lot of it could be tied with a lot of other cultures. And so there's, again, multiple identities that we have, and we have to be okay with someone not being the same as us. We have to be okay with the differences that we have. And even when it comes to spirituality or religion or gender identity or sexual orientation, there are some things that we may not agree with, but it's not about that. It's about just accepting the person for the differences that they have, and that be it. We don't have to put our positions as a judge, an executioner, a prosecutor, or anything else. We just have to be present. And so moving forward, the support that we can have for each other as Black women is to just be present in our support, in sincerity, and our being intentional and deliberate with that.
Thank you, Alla. Najma and Lul, kind of same questions to you all. What does solidarity look like to you all?
For me, it's showing up. So just, when you feel like your sister or any other woman is going through something, or just you seem like she's not being her usual self, show up. Show up in the sense of exactly as you were saying, ask her, like, how can I support you? Is there anything I can do to help you? Is there something that I can do to distress you in a sense? Listen without judgment, and make sure that you're always allowing people to be able to express their true feelings and just express their true emotions without shutting them down or navigating them into kind of, believing what you believe, or trying to, because a lot of the times, when a sister is talking about her problems, we may jump in and interrupt and be like, oh, I went through this, and try to push our opinion or our experience onto them, but actually allow them to speak. Because if you pay attention, a lot of the times we're not seeking for advice. We're just seeking for an ear. So know the difference between when someone is asking for advice, and try, just to ask, do you need my advice? Do you want me to advise you before jumping in? Because you'll see a difference. Because sometimes, like I stated, they're not looking for advice. They just want someone that they trust, that they can find in and that space to just speak and talk while they're just processing their thoughts. They don't even know how to process their emotions a lot of the times as women. So it's just, let me talk it out loud with you. So allowing them that space to speak, and you listening, and make sure you're not holding any judgment. And you're not doing the whole comparing, like, I went through that happened to me. Because we have to be very considerate as human beings that not every two people who may face the exact same trauma feel it the same way, nor express it the same way. So one individual may be crying and ready to talk about, another individual may be angry. Don't try to think you know which emotion is right, which way they should act, because you see that a lot of times, like, well, she seems fine. You don't know what she's dealing with internal. You don't know if she's going home and crying. She may be putting on a brave face. So just being extremely mindful and allowing people to just process their emotions as they know, because not everyone is in the same path. Like I said, not everyone is going to process it the same two ways. So don't hold no judgment. As Alla said, do not have any expectations for one another. Show up when you're needed. Show up, even if it means to completely sit there in silence. If you do not have the right words, what are right words? I don't think we ever have the right words for anything. Like if it's grief, if it's sexual abuse, if it's physical domestic abuse, I don't think there's any right words. So even if it means just showing up and sitting next to someone in silence, then that's what's needed. And when you see that a woman is in pain, whatever kind of pain it may be, don't broadcast it. Don't expose it. If someone, even if I feel like if someone is sharing their story publicly, don't broadcast it. That's for them to share their story and to reach it wherever they need to reach it. Don't speak of their names privately. Don't speak of their names in your group message. Like, just honestly and wholeheartedly respect people, because we don't know what may happen to us, our loved ones. So you always want to be mindful and treat everyone as if they're your loved one, and just show up, support, give people the space they need. And that's all I can say for supporting each other and standing in solitaires when something really happens in our communities. And whether it's our brothers, but our sisters, as we speak of now, to actually come together for a positive change, not to deter each other down, not to sit there and be like, she's lying, there's no evidence, we need proof, we need this, to provoke each other to even actually feeling the guilt that you guys want them to feel. But more importantly, understanding that, okay, this person is coming to a public platform, they're speaking about their experience. We're not going to add on to any more problems. We're not going to expose, we're not going to share their pictures all over the network, the internet. So just really being mindful across everybody. And then as women who are community organizers, to collectively come to each other. That's how we can support each other as community organizers, come together. I know Maryan does healing. I know that now you work with Ramsey County. You guys know that I have a nonprofit organization. There's other women who have nonprofit organizations as well. How can we collectively come together to use all our resources to make sure that we're reaching everybody that needs our services? That's another way that we can support each other as community organizers.
Thank you. Najma, what are you thinking?
Yes, Lulu, you're really speaking to the choir when you talk about unsolicited advice, because a lot of the times we're so quick to jump the gun and give advice right away, or give our input or what we think, and we don't usually listen. And solidarity can look differently for different people and the capacity they have for it. And as Black women, solidarity to me on a collectively, it would be showing up and creating spaces where we're healing, where we're listening to each other, and where we're supporting each other. Because a lot of survivors don't get that. So collectively, solidarity looks like that for me, ideally. And we're getting there. This is one of those spaces. And individually, it's unlearning, it's questioning your own ideologies, what you've internalized, and unlearning some harmful ideologies, in lack of better words. But it's taking responsibility. Collectively, we all have a responsibility to speak up, to be there for one another. A lot of times peer pressure, a lot of times culture can make us stay silent or be bystanders, excuse me. But individually, if one does not have the capacity to show up collectively and create that space, you can take that responsibility upon yourself to question what you think, question how you see things, the actions you're taking. And really, when it comes down to it, like Lulu was speaking on, think before you act and think before you talk, have some thoughtfulness, because it's very personal. It's very personal. And yeah.
I think so many great points. What you're also making me think about is what support looks like, and how sometimes even the well-intentioned, the ones that love us the most, Maryan, as you were saying earlier, our mothers, our aunties, the ones who love us, and how they think they're protecting us by reinforcing this culture sometimes, right? I'm thinking about, older generation women who have this ideology that, like, if your husband doesn't beat you, then he doesn't love you. Like, it's okay. This is normal. This is part of it. This is how they show they care. You know what I mean? And really coming from this place of like, I care about you. I'm just trying to let you know what reality is. And so I'm thinking about also the women who are the family members of the accused, and how, what their idea of support looks like. And so, Najma, when you're talking about bystander, it just made me think about, what does being an active bystander look like, right? Like, how do you interrupt shame culture? How do you interrupt the rape culture, the violence that we see, and how, let's say somebody that you care about, a cousin, an uncle, whatever, is accused. And I think I would say most women probably, know their family members and know what folks are capable of and are not capable of. And so I think deep down folks know, but I can imagine then the fear and the confusion and the emotions of like, where do I fit in? What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to support my family member or this woman that I don't know who may be speaking up, even though my gut tells me there might be something to this? And so, like, I can imagine this really difficult place that some of our, folks are in, right? But this idea of what I'm hearing all you say, which is like, not assume anything about how women are supposed to, or how folks that have been assaulted are supposed to respond, from an assault. Like, everybody is different, right? And if nothing else, if you can't do anything else, then maybe just stay silent. You don't need to add on to the flame. You don't need to continue the attack. And so it's okay to not do that. And again, this active bystander thing, then how do you question, how do you interrupt in your family, in your culture, when you do have folks making certain comments, acting certain ways, when you notice things, which even with that, there's violence, possibility of violence for those who do that as well, right? And so it's a really difficult place to be. And so I don't want to skip over that I know it's hard to change culture. It's hard to shift it. And there's serious threats for that to happen. But again, I don't think we have any other option but to push forward with this and do what we can. Go ahead, Alla, were you going to say something?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to say that 80 to 90% of victim survivors know their abuser. And most of the time it's an acquaintance. And so there's a word, acquaintance rape, right? So it's rarely a stranger doing this on you. It's rarely just like a random act by someone, And so that complexity that you're speaking about, Hana, is real, because oftentimes it's your uncle, your brother, your father, your grandfather, your fiance, your boyfriend, your best friend, someone that you know. And so how do you even begin to separate those really conflicting emotions? You love this person, you trust this person, and yet they're harming you. And so we need to recognize also that as much as we think we know people, we really don't. I can sit here and say, I know exactly who my cousin is, and I know exactly who kind of person he is an upright, person of the community, but I have to be aware that there is a capacity that he can harm someone. And again, like you said, Hana, which is a valid point, sometimes we don't have to do anything. If we are in a position where we know that the person who you're related to and the person that we love has hurt someone, and we know they're the person who was abused, we have conflicting feelings, and it's okay for us to not say anything. It's okay for us to literally just remove ourselves from there and just allow things to go how they're supposed to. You don't have to put yourself in a position of, I believe her, I know exactly what happened, nor I believe him, I know exactly what happened. You don't have to do that at all. That can be really conflicting for someone. So if you can't, remove yourself from that situation and just allow things to be. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on the complexities of the fact that most often than not, we know exactly who our abuser is, and that adds on a separate layer of complicated feelings.
Yeah, definitely. Let me see, I have one more. So I think we have a little bit of time left, and I want us to be able to talk about actionable steps. I think you've already mentioned what that looks like, about what it looks like for us to be in communication more with each other, to know what work is being done, and what resources are out there for people. But just wanted to give space if there are, either advice or just any steps that either ourselves or the folks that might be watching who have no idea how to get started, who, I know there's a lot of women who are sickened by this part of our culture and this reality and want to do something, but don't feel like they can, right? Or don't know where to start because it's so overwhelming and it's so scary. So I guess I'm curious, how would you advise those who want to change the culture, who want us to do better? What would you advise them to do?
For those who want to change the culture, right? Is that who the advice is going for? For those who want to change the culture, change always begins with us as an individual. So in order for us to change anything, we need to make sure that we're in the right place when we're dealing with a survivor or a bystander, as the women were mentioning, or just associated with anyone who's going through anything, that we ourselves are creating that space. We ourselves are supporting that individual. And when we say support, just meaning is if the least you can do is listen without questioning them. Don't question them. They'll share what they feel comfortable sharing. And then if you must speak, if you can't do anything further, if you're not going to say, I believe you, do you want me to go, to the law with you? Should we go report this? Ask them, what do you want me to do? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Would you like to report this individual? What do you think is safe for you? What capacity can your emotions hold? So just basically start with yourself. So then once you start with yourself, in your groups, in your private groups, we all have our inner circles that we talk to with about everything. Make sure that you are not speaking about people and their downfalls or their struggles or their pain in a humorous way in group messages. Make sure that if one friend might have that, personality where it's like, oh my God, did you hear such and such posted this? You're the one to put a stop to that, because as far as you're in that group message, they're not going to feel comfortable talking about that because they know that you're in there and you're going to put a stop to that. If they create anything after you and you're not a part of that group message, you don't need that negativity in your life. So that's fine. Don't feel bad. And anywhere you go, just take along with you, just to make sure you're a good character of a being and you have good morals and you're just being mindful of others. That's all it comes down to. Just being mindful. Like, it doesn't have to happen to you to have empathy for someone else. You can just imagine, and that's what empathy is, just you putting yourself in that person's shoes or those people's shoes and just thinking, if this happened to me, I don't even know what I would do. So I'm not even going to act like I should tell you what to do. And just, carrying that along with you everywhere you go, anyone you talk to, and being honest. I'll be the first to say, I don't know too much about sexual abuse. You know, I just know that it exists. I'm not going to deny it. I do personally know a few people that it happened to that talk to me about it personally, but I'm not an expert. So I will never be shamed to say that I don't know. So if you don't know anything and someone comes up to you, just tell them, I don't know. I haven't been in that predicament. I don't know what I should do. Please teach me, lead me to basically support you. Just tell me what you need. So that's the advice I have for the listeners, the advice that I have, you know, just make sure you're a good person and you're being mindful.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Lul, on the internal work of like starting with yourself, right? Why does this stand why does this stand to you? How do you relate to it? And why is it that you're mobilized or you're moved to do something about it, right? And what does that look like? Where is it coming from? And then what is your goal? What are you trying to get at? And I think identifying that for yourself first and understanding, because there's layers to it, right? Like in our communities and from our own like internalized racism, internalized anti-blackness, and working through that, and then to getting to here and to understanding what is it, why does something upset you, you know, how does it influence your life, and then talk to the people around you, wherever it is that it's safe for you to have that conversation, whether it's if you're able to do it within your own family, right? If you're trying to shift something, you have to have this is not one of my favorite terms, but kind of a buy-in with the community and with the group of people that you're trying to shift that behavior. And that means having conversations and understanding to them, this is influencing you this way, or this is coming up for you in one way. How does it come up with the people that you share space with? Do you share, you know, a home with them? Do you share space as friendships? Do you share a building with them, right? Like having that conversation and then seeing who else shares that grievance, and then mobilizing that group of people to take their own power, because we each have our own abilities to do something about whatever that's influencing us, right? And the larger of a group we can get, the greater effect that we can have. But first, understanding internally, what does this mean for you, and doing your own work around that and recognizing your own traumas, and then moving on to talking and having conversations with groups or circles around you. And that will allow you to shift that, because you can't change everybody's mind. Like that should not be your goal. Like our goal in changing culture, it's not changing people's mind, it is creating a culture that serves us better. And that takes step by step, block by block. And that work has, like, the mind change will come once we have started to make the movement. And I think the first thing that in our culture understanding is that us changing, us doing the work that we need to do in order to be better with each other within our community, in order to have accountability, in order to heal collectively together, whatever our traumas are. We have a ton of traumas. We have, you know, for the past 500 years that has influenced us. In order to do that, we have to make these shifts. And that the benefit of us changing and really paying attention to our individualness and our groups as a whole, and then thinking from that, like, only me to we have to do this collectively together, that is greater for our community. That's better for our community. That's better for our survival. And I think in holding on to pieces of culture that are harmful to us, that's what the person that's holding on is trying to do, right? In a way to save us, because we're so far away from home, we're so far removed from it. But helping them to understand that you holding on like this is not helping us to survive. It's actually harming our community. We're actually losing our culture faster and at a greater rate. But shifting and changing and really be authentic with each other is what is going to help us to survive. And that's not an easy work too. I might say it in these steps, but that's not something that's easy. And especially it's not easy to do the work internally for yourself, because you're going to come up corners of your own that do not look very pretty, and you have to deal with that. You have to sit with that, and you have to recognize that that is the only way to change that. And so I think, to me, that's what cultural shift looks like. It's to really fully understand and give each other space to do the work individually and then collectively together, to know that this is the only way to shift, and that what it is right now, it's not serving us. And that's,
Yeah,
at least from my perspective, that's what it means.
absolutely. The personal and the communal, right? Doing it together, doing our own work, and making sure we're doing it with each other as well.
Yeah, the collective.
I just wanted to say that, in addition to what these wonderful women have said, we have to unlearn a lot of the behaviors that we ourselves uphold. Even I myself, as I'm dealing with victim survivors on a daily basis, I know I uphold a lot of biases as well. And so I have to check myself every single day, every single time I speak to someone. Why am I thinking this way? And it's a process. It's not an easy, but it's so profound when I notice myself unlearning that behavior. And so the next time that I'm speaking with a victim survivor, I'm going into it better. And that's what growth is. I'm constantly getting better and better once I recognize my behavior and once I take actions and unlearning it. Another thing we have to do is we have to hold each other accountable. The only way, if we want to move forward, is by when we hear something, we say something. When we see something, we do something, if we have the capacity to do so and if it's safe to do so. Over this weekend, I was speaking to a loved one, and I was telling her about something I was doing, and that, sexual violence work and so forth. And she mentioned that it's a victim survivor is like ruined. And I said, how is she ruined? And there was silence. It was like, oh, well, I didn't mean ruined. What I meant was that. And so you really have to check what people are saying, because oftentimes they themselves don't know why they're saying it. They don't know why it's aib. They don't know why it's shameful. It's just been passed along. They've heard it, that it's shameful, and so they've passed it on. And so when you check them, when you question and challenge them in a very respectful way, it doesn't have to be combative, they themselves start to recognize what was just said, and they can take a step back and clarify what they're meaning. And it can be a really profound conversation, how we can get to the root of, why is this word being said? Why is this shameful? Why is this ruined? Why is this that? When you get to the root of that, you realize that there's absolutely no basis to any of this, none. And so how we move forward is by checking that and checking each other and holding each other accountable as well. Are we laughing at rape jokes? Are we saying really problematic things? Are we hearing them and not saying anything? Once we realize that we have power to stop something and to say something, then we can move forward. And another thing we need to recognize is we each have different capacities, and we're not supposed to be inundated with such traumatic information. Sexual violence is really traumatic, very triggering. We're not supposed to be talking about this every single day in every single space. But unfortunately, because of the years and years of silence, now things are being unleashed. But it's okay for us to disengage, to disconnect, and to be like, I don't have capacity for that right now. Even if it means someone who wants to come and share that information with you, you have to recognize that you uphold that ability to step back and make sure that you or yourself are okay, and you have the capacity to support. And this isn't for everyone. I would say check yourself and see if you are able to. You could be a great support system, or you could be really doing yourself a disservice as well if you haven't healed within yourself, or if there's things that are triggering to you. And lastly, collaborate with each other. This work is not supposed to be done in silos. And I love the space that we have right now. And so I would encourage everyone to continue having spaces with each other, hear each other out, see how you can work collaboratively with each other. That's the way that we can move forward and truly properly address sexual violence and prevent it from happening in the future. And so again, I'm very grateful that you all have made this space available, and that this is being on a collaborative level.
Thank you, Alla. Najma, did you want to add to that?
Yes, beautifully said, seriously. And just thinking about responsibility, I just want to individually, like Alla said, we are responsible to hold ourselves accountable and to know our own capacity and limit. But I have a question first. What is the responsibility of men, and how can they hold themselves accountable? Anyone can answer this question.
Yeah, I'm glad. That was definitely a point I wanted to bring up too, because it does always frustrate me that I don't want this conversation to just be framed as women's work, right? Or women's issue. When, well, one, for one, we know that it's, you know, men are also victims of sexual violence, right? And children, obviously. And so I don't want to take away that it's not just women, and women can also be perpetrators in that. But we do know, statistically speaking, that the majority, you know, the high majority of the sexual assault offenders are men. And we know that has to do with the violent culture that we have that glorifies, you know, toxic masculinity, and this idea of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. And so I do get very frustrated that, of course, it's going to be us that speak up. Of course, it's going to be us that are talking about how to support our sisters. But men have to take a big role in this. They need to take a big portion of this burden, because this is men's responsibility, right? This is a culture that needs to be addressed. And so when we're talking about what does you know, bystander, active bystander look like, it's kind of a call out to all the men that I know in our culture who have been victims of this violence, whether if they've witnessed it or, you know, they've been victims of it themselves. And the ones, you know, our brothers who know it and see it and don't like this, don't want this to be our culture, but are afraid to speak up or do something about it. This is a call out to them too, of like, we need you to speak up. You know, one of the things that I've been really thinking about is that it's not a coincidence that all of this is happening, you know, with George Floyd and the killing of George Floyd and the state-sponsored violence that we see. There's a connection between that state violence and the personal, and the violence in the bedroom, and the violence in our homes. Like, that is not disconnected, right? And so, you know, how is it that, you know, all of us that can go out, and I see a lot of our brothers out protesting for George Floyd, and then when we're talking about the violence that's happening in our community, then it's like, stop, don't divide the Black community. We have an agenda that we need to accomplish. Mm-hmm. This is just something we need to keep quiet within our own space. And so, Najma, you're opening up a can of worms, because I have a whole thing I can go off on this, but, you know, I think I love it because our sisters will always show up. Women will always do the work. I feel like the only reason I have hope that things are going to change is because of Black women, honestly. And so, but it's not to say that this isn't a space for our Black men to step up and to do what is right, and to support and protect, you know, their community and their sisters and daughters and mothers. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot. And to clarify too, what it means to be a bystander. A bystander is someone who is watching things happen, right? Who watches the violence happen in front of them and doesn't do anything, who watches assault or knows about it or hears about it and doesn't do anything. And it's not to say that, you know, responding or doing something is easy. A lot of times it's very hard, and it puts that individual in harm's way. But there's also a lot of trainings around how to be an active bystander without necessarily putting yourself in direct harm, right? So if you see someone, you know, being violent towards somebody else, your only option isn't to run up and intervene in the middle of it. There's ways of, you know, whether it's calling somebody, whether it's you know, yelling from a distance or interrupting it and being like, you know, I used to do these trainings about active bystander, and one of my favorite ones was like, if you see somebody in a heated debate or something, just kind of nonchalantly going by and being like, hey, you know, I'm lost. Can you give me direction to something else? Just to distract people from that moment, and to kind of disrupt what's happening. Not to say that's going to fix it, but just like these little ways that we can disrupt violence when we see it. And so, yes, I think there's a lot, and I want a lot of this work to be supported by our brothers. Yeah.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah, and support can look differently. You can show support by supporting organizations and women that are creating space to heal and seek restorative justice. You know, you can personally and publicly support all that.
I would also add, especially for, because I know a lot of the folks that have been coming forward are college students. and utilizing. So obviously I work at a university, and there are a lot of resources at universities and colleges. So I really, really recommend looking into those, whether that's group, like just a group to meet and talk with, or if that's an office that exists, the Women's Resource Center, or whatever offices there may be to support victims and survivors of sexual assault and harassment. And I would also say, if you, as a student, are somebody who has been assaulted or is feeling harassed or threatened, you can always report it to your institution, and they have a legal right to follow through on that and to support you and to find a way to resolve it or address the issue. And so every institution that you're part of has a legal obligation to do so. And so make sure you know how to file those reports at your institution. If those of you who may be Augsburg students, if you don't know, I posted it on the Pan-African Center Instagram page, but feel free to reach out to me if you need some of those resources.
Thank you, Hana. I think for me, to the question of like, what can the men in our community do? There's so much, right? And you're right, the statistics show that it's not sexual violence, it's not just committed against women. It also can be committed against, it also does happen to men as well. And there's so many ways to identify that, right? Like people's multiple identities and the way they share and how they visibly show up and who they are can differ, and it can also go from there. But I think for me, immediately, what I think of, like, how, as a man, and however way you identify as a man within our communities, whether that is, the Somali community, East African community, and the like Black at large, in the diaspora, and then in the US, how do you uphold heteronormative cultures? How do you uphold like gender roles, right? That has a huge influence of the sense of ownership over women's bodies, the sense of ownership of like somebody who can seem a little bit weaker, or this, right? Of the gender roles and gender identities and sexualities. And I think that in itself, right? Like, how do you uphold that? When do you see it? Do you recognize what it is? Like, it can be very minor. And I think the other thing important about culture is, in order for something to become a culture, a collective have to accept what that is. And I joked earlier about not signing a piece of paper about having a Somali culture, but I still buy into a sense of a Somali culture here, right? And that responsibility then becomes the individuals. There is for something to be a culture, it means for a long period of time you have let it go, and now it just becomes the norm. And then that bro culture develops, where then when you are not in these spaces, how do you hold your best friend accountable? Maybe this is a person that you're around in community, you go to school with them, you go to the same masjid with them, you hang out with them, you play video games, whatever it is, or you go shoot hoops with them. How do you hold them accountable? Do you still sharing that space with them, and the conversations that you allow for builds that culture, therefore creates a container for that harm to be done. And I think that for me, and from our leaders in the mosques, which predominantly tend to be male, how do you hold that? What is our conversations around khutbah? That is a space where we're supposed to be talking about topics like this and addressing what's currently in real time happening in our community. And if you are a leader in that mosque and that's not happening, then there's an issue. That conversation is not happening, then there is an issue in how you're leading, and then you need to change that structure. You need to pause and take that time to shift that structure, to deal with your own biases and how you move within our community. And I think those are some of the places to start, and that can then create the culture. Those are the culture builders of our community, and how they move and hold up that heteronormative culture is what influences how women's bodies are viewed, right? From the trans woman to the cisgendered woman, between that, there is that culture, and that is that sense of power, of ownership, or sense of it's a woman's body and this is what it's for. That accepting that culture and upholding that culture, that's what I think men can do in our community, is look for that culture and then, work towards to not upholding it, pay attention to gender roles. How do you treat, a little girl? Like, do you constantly need to supervise her versus where boys are allowed to go explore in the community?
Imagine that our religious leaders being the ones to push for this, how quickly and how much that would transform our communities to have that, right? That's huge. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Najma, how are we? Did you say we can go until 7:30, or I know the program says till 7, but.
Yes, we have time for questions. If you, I'm looking at the Facebook Live, or anyone can post any questions.
I'd like to open it to our panelists too, if there's kind of a question or a thought that you wanted us to hit on that we haven't.
You mentioned something earlier, Hana, which is purity and the concept of purity, and that's something that is so rampant in every culture, right? As it is attributed to women and their purity, and what ties it down is their virginity. And I think oftentimes what happens with communities and cultures, especially, I would say, I can speak for myself as a Sudani, in the Sudani culture, the reason that there isn't that talk about sexual assault and sexual violence is because there's not a conversation about its complete opposite, which is consensual, positive, healthy relationships, which is sex. So when we don't talk about sex, how can we talk about its complete opposite, which absolves you from giving consent or providing consent and then resulting in that sexual violence? And that is the root of it. If we're uncomfortable talking about sex, if we're shaming women for even saying sex, if we're shaming people from having these conversations about what comprehensive sex ed is, or what a healthy relationship is, or talking about sex in any capacity, we're never going to reach a space where we are acknowledging that sexual violence occurs. And I think that is because, for many reasons, one being that our communities are so afraid of healing and what it comes with, that they are more comfortable being in this discomfort, the space of unknown, or the space of known, right? We are okay where we are now. And I think there's this fear of healing and what that could unleash and all of the good things. I really feel that that's what it is. There's that fear of healing and what that could do once we address sexual violence. But disconnecting the idea that there is any relation to virginity and purity, and that even if you are upholding this view that there is such a thing as virginity and purity, sexual assault is not sex. So there's no relationship at all to that. Sexual assault is removing someone's consent. It's not agreed upon for you to have sex with them. It removes that from the first place. And so sexual assault is not sex. And so when we start to have conversations about what sex is, we can acknowledge what it is, and that is healthy, it's normal, it's acceptable, but sexual assault is not. So I just wanted to touch on that piece for a little bit.
That's huge. There's so much to that. And one of the things that comes to my mind when you say that is, working with college students, I've come across so many young women who have grown up, myself included, within my culture. You don't talk about sex, you don't date, you don't do relationship until you get married, right? And somehow you're supposed to find the right partner that don't have any experience in dating or learning about sex or any of that. But one of the things that terrifies me and that I've seen is that you have these young girls who have never had any conversation. Maybe schools will talk about it, but we all know what a terrible job the sex education is in our school system. And we'll go through, high school, middle school, eager to be in relationships, really, really eager to want to experience, love and relationship and that. And we'll come to college and we'll fall for, the first person that looks their way, or whether it's an abusive person, whether it's, whoever these people are that they partner up with, the lack of experience and the lack of exposure and conversation is really, really dangerous. And I see it play out quite a lot. If you're first, if you're so eager to be in a relationship, you don't see a lot of the red flags, around abuse and harassment and even assault, right? Like you normalize it if you don't see it. And so, yeah, it's hurting us in so many ways. Another thing for me, I would say, speaking personally, I have endometriosis. If you know what that is, if you get your periods, it's really painful. But it's a women's health issue, right? And so even the idea of our culture and how little we talk about what it means to be a woman, and what women's health looks like, I know how much that's impacted me, right? Because had I felt comfortable, how earlier I would have spoken out about endometriosis, or when I was going to the doctors and I didn't get the service that I needed, how I could have responded. And so it impacts us on so many levels, this lack of information, or just this inability to talk about it. And for some reason, we're taught to feel shame around being a woman. Like it feels like we're just born a sin, right? Like we're just being a woman, we've committed some great sin. And so, yeah, I think that's a big point that you bring up, Alla. Najma, were there any questions?
None so far, but we have about 5 minutes left until we've reached our max time.
Okay. Yeah. Any last words, departing words from any of you lovely women?
And mine is what you just said, Hana, of like, this idea of like we are either born as a sin as women in our communities, or we're just like one step away from it. And so like somebody needs to be watching every step that we take and how we behave. Like it's from where how we laugh, right? How I remember like being a bridesmaid for my cousin's wedding, and I was told to not smile too much by my family members, and I was like, I'm quite happy. I actually would like to, but this idea of like, don't be so seen, don't be this, like you're just a little bit away from it. If they already don't believe that you're already there, like you're just a little bit away from it. And I need to, like, everybody needs to watch you from that edge, and that puts you in such a spot where then the moment it feels like something is shameful or something is this way, then immediately everybody reacts of like, oh, there you go, we knew you were going to do this. Like it's this expectation of like this was gonna, like, I grew up, I'm a very, my behavior was a very tomboy when I was a kid. I played soccer in an all boys team, and where my mom and my grandmother were not worried about me, but our community was. They were just like, you're letting her, she's growing up. Like every year they were like, okay, now she's this old, now she's this old, like constantly tracking what I would do. And all I cared about was playing that game, not so much of what happened, but then how they behaved changed it for me. Like, right, they changed the game and changed being in that space. And yeah, just thinking about that, just thinking about like that, like you're about to do it, you're about to like go into that, bring us all shame in the next 5 seconds, or and that itself, like existing in that way itself is just so, it's not healthy. Like, and how much of that is internalized, right? Then you internalize it and you carry it for yourself, and thinking that I'm about to do this, I'm about to do this. And when it happens, like the repercussions that lives in your body that you've been trained with. And I think, as a form of a parting is understanding that there is nothing wrong with you. You are not, your existence is not shame. Your body is not shame. Your how you feel inside and outside is not shame. Like, right, you are you. And that is, that's the best thing to be, and that itself makes our community stronger, like having the ability and that freedom to just be. And as I've learned, in my 30 years of life, to overcome a lot of this and to unlearn some of these behaviors, each step is freeing, and each step creates space for me to be able to be fully in community, to be aware of the community. And that work is always happening, right? That's not done. I'm not in any way done, and every day I discover something that I need to work through and to change, or something's discovered through movement within community. And how do I hold, like my learning and my understanding of healing justice, that is forever work. My learning and understanding internally of who I am, what I want to be, that is forever work. And in collective community, that's what it means. Like there's a place to hold for all of us and to move that. And that's continuously our work. We have a lot of trauma to work through. We have a lot of shifts to work through. And I think for me and my place of it is to hold patience and to hold mercy. And as I hold that, to continuously not settle for less than, to not accept that we can't shift and change. We must shift and change. We must look out for each other. We must accept our community as a collective. And what does it mean for us? And continue to hold those in power accountable, those who take up space accountable, and until we get to where we need to get to. And I believe we can get that. I believe that we have what it takes. I believe that our mothers are a huge role in this. I also believe, you know, in my generation especially, our mothers are the people that saved us from a civil war, right? They have so much power. And they have moved us through across oceans to bring us here, to give us a better future. And I believe in that. I believe in that intention and in that work that they've put in. And I believe they can put in the work right now to move us through this, to move us through, you know, understanding and learning through what it means to be Black in America, what it means to work collectively for our Black liberation while having these different histories and these different narratives, and then to work through our, like, you know, heteroculture. What does that mean, and how do we move through that to fully come together as a community? And that itself influences us in so many aspects. And I believe in that. I believe in that love. I believe in that the love that has moved us across, you know, a whole world can again move us through this, and will continue to move us through that. And I think I believe in that, and I hold that, through this. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's so much you just like sparked in my head, but I know we don't have time. And so I'll leave it to Lul, Alla, and Najma. Did you have some kind of parting words for us?
Yes, just to put it out there that by no means do we mean to generalize the whole Somali community. We are aware that there are some households that have these dialogues with their children. We are aware that some families feel comfortable talking about their puberty and their periods and safe sex and abstinence and virginity and all that stuff. And when we speak in these platforms and we speak about these topics, it's for the greater population that this is not a norm for. So just to keep that in mind, I know that there are some people out there, and I've witnessed firsthand actually knowing some people that have that dynamic relationship within their families. So I wanted to just be mindful of that population, that by any means, we don't mean to generalize any of the communities. We're just speaking of the greater population and what they're facing.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yeah, the last thing I want to say is, first, thank you so much for the space. And also, I'd like for everyone, if you are a victim survivor of sexual assault, you don't have to feel the pressure of disclosing what was done to you. Yes, there are brave and courageous voices who have come forward, but so are you, brave and courageous. And just because someone is speaking about it in whatever platform does not mean that you have to, nor does it mean that you're not as brave or as courageous, or that anything about you is less than. And that's okay. If we each have our own capacity, and we each have a way and time and a place where we may feel comfortable. And so do what's best for you. Recognize what's best for you. And if it's not now, that's okay. It's completely fine. The most important thing I would say is to have supportive people around you. Anyone who chooses to joke or not believe or shame or anything of that sort, it's okay for you to disconnect from them. It's okay for you to surround yourself with healthy, positive, uplifting people around you. And reach out if you are comfortable. Our services with SOS are 24/7. You can reach out to me directly. I'm a confidential person. I will be there for you and connect you with any resources. There's no shame at all. It was not your fault. It is not your fault. And we are here to support you and to be there for you. And I want to recognize all of those who have been silenced, that it's not your fault. And again, we're here for you and we support you.
Thank you so much, Alla. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, ladies. This has been powerful, and let's work on normalizing these kinds of conversations, these kinds of spaces. Let's normalize a lot of the taboo things within our cultures that are harmful. You know, sex education should not be taboo. Listening to listening to victims and survivors is not taboo. Once again, thank you for holding the space. Please, we'll link a resource sheet in Minnesota that you can pass on to victims or survivors. You can reach out to any of us. Black Women Speak will be holding a healing session in the next coming up week, a virtual space, and we invite you to that. So please check out all the information down below.
Yeah, I wanted to add to, we wanted to have this to kind of, you know, to start the conversation, continue the conversation in the with the Pan-African community specifically, but I know that a lot of these conversations have been happening, and are planning to continue that, and planning to hold spaces for folks to just come and talk to each other rather than just kind of the webinar format. And so, yes, absolutely. Thank you, all of you. Like I said, I swear the only reason I don't lose hope is because of Black women. I think Black women are just incredible. The courage and the strength keeps me going and makes me hopeful that we will move towards the kind of culture and society we want to live in. So thank you all for your incredible work that you're doing. And I'm excited to get to know you a little bit better and work with you in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.